السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Welcome to another episode of the Call of Ibrahim alayhi salam, where we learn some of the rituals of Hajj from a specific book, the book of Al-Tahqiq wal-Idah by Sheikh Abdul Aziz bin Baz rahimahullah ta'ala. It's a beautiful book and I recommend everyone to read it with whatever translation if you don't speak the Arabic language, and to take it with you in the journey of Hajj inshallah ta'ala as a reference of how to perform the Hajj inshallah ta'ala. We're being very brief the way even it's explained. And we stopped where the Sheikh rahimahullah, he makes a chapter about mahdurat al-ihram, what's forbidden for a person to observe while being in the state of al-ihram. As you see the word al-ihram, it makes sense where haram, something forbidden. And it's basically, this is what it is. Certain things that were permissible before you are in that state of al-ihram becomes forbidden only for the period that a person is in ihram. Once a person observes the ihram by the miqat, before the miqat, right before the miqat or by the miqat, till, if it's umrah, till a person finishes the umrah, if it's hajj, till a person finishes the hajj or the first tahallul. There are two of them, which is the first one, the 10th of the Hijjah. Usually most of the people, they would relieve themselves from their clothing of al-ihram and most of what's forbidden or all of what's forbidden except relations with women. Some people, they associate al-ihram with clothing only. No, it's a state. So it's not clothing only, it's a state that a person is in, and that's why count with me the things that he mentions where it's forbidden for a person to observe while in ihram. He says that the meaning of which, it's not permissible for a person in state of al-ihram after making the niyyah. So you can put your clothes of al-ihram before you reach the miqat because you get into a plane, but you're not in ihram yet. You can cover your head, you can do whatever you want. But once you say labbaik Allahumma umrah or labbaik Allahumma hajjan, then you are in state of al-ihram. So that means it's not permissible, whether you are male or female, that you take anything of your hair or your nails or to put perfume on. Male and female, nothing. Not to pluck any hair, not to cut the hair, not to do anything. And he says that it's not permissible, especially for male, that they would, this is for male only, that they would wear anything sewed to their body. And this is the word makhit, is not stitches as some people think, right? The ihram, if it's stitched, it's okay. What's forbidden is to wear something that is sewed to the body, that has arms, that has places for the legs like pants or shirts or things like this, or head as it will be mentioned. Anything that is sewed to the body, this is not permissible for men. Shirts and the like of this. And the same thing with socks, all of that is not permissible whatsoever. And to wear slippers or sandals, as long as there's nothing around the heel. If a person does not find any slippers or sandals, then there's no harm to wear shoes if a person is not finding one. Because this is stated by the Prophet ﷺ, مَنْ لَمْ يَجِدْ نَعْلَيْنِ فَلْيَلْبَسِ الْخُفَّيْنِ وَمَنْ لَمْ يَجِدْ إِزَارًا فَلْيَلْبَسْ السَّرَاوِيلِ. Whoever does not find sandals or slippers, then let them wear shoes. And whoever is not able to find the lower garment, then they can wear pants. There is no harm on them and they don't have to do dam or blood or anything of that nature. And as the Sheikh mentions here, when it comes to, some people might mention the hadith of Ibn Umar radiallahu anhu, that the Prophet ﷺ commanded for people to cut the shoes from the back of it, the heel part of it, so that they can wear it. He says this is abrogated because the Prophet ﷺ commanded that in Al-Madinah when he was asked. And then when the Prophet ﷺ went after Medina going to Mecca, then when he was asked ﷺ, he said the hadith that we just heard, in which if you don't find the slippers, then you wear the shoes. So that means it shows that this was abrogated. So this is absolutely fine. But most people now, it's easy to find these matters by the mercy of Allah. Also he says it's permissible for the person being in ihram to wear these sandals or slippers as long as it's below the ankles and it's not like the shoes where the heels are not covered. Also he says that it's permissible, of course, to wear the izar or the lower garment and to tie it with a rope or the like of it, or a belt or something like this, because there's nothing of an evidence that prevents a person from doing so. You can tie it in the conventional way, or if you want to put a rope or a belt around it, there's no harm, and this is permissible. Also, it's permissible for the person in ihram to take a shower and to wash his head and to even rub his head. There's no harm in this whatsoever if he needs to do so with gentleness, to be at ease. And if something falls from the hair without intentionally doing so, and without being very harsh and doing it in a rough way, there's no sin for the person, there's no implications to this whatsoever. He talks about the ihram of the women. If she makes ihram, that she, of course, the woman, she wears her normal clothing, and the ihram for women is only in the face and in the hands. What is meant by the face is it's not permissible for her to wear the burqa or a niqab. A niqab or burqa, which is the face veil, it's sewed to the face. It's fixed on the face. This is what it's not permissible. And the same thing with the gloves. It is not permissible for her to wear gloves, because the Prophet ﷺ stated that clearly. لا تنتقب المرأة ولا تلبس القفازين. The woman should not wear the niqab, which is fit on the face, and it is not permissible for her to wear the gloves. And it's permissible for her anything, of course, to wear and to cover herself, of course, with the hijab, the proper hijab, and to with the conditions of the hijab to be observed. And he says that it's permissible for her to have the khimar to be put down on her face while in the state of al-ihram, because of the presence of men, and she doesn't have to tie it to anything. What's forbidden is the niqab, which is sewed on the face. And the hadith of Aisha radiallahu anha, she said that كان الركبان, the people riding in the journey with them, يمرون بنا, they would pass by us, and we are with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So once they come next to us, adjacent to us, one of us would put her jilbab from the top of her head to cover her face, so that the men do not see their faces. So the same thing, and if once they passes, then they would lift it up again. So the same thing for the women, to cover her face in the presence of men. And he talks about how the awra of the woman, and to cover herself, her body from head to toe, and that the most attractive part is the face and the hands, so that is to be covered. And of course she covers that underneath the khimar. And the ayah that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala clearly commanded the wives of the Prophet ﷺ and the women, the believing women, that if men ask them for something, is that they ask them فَاسْأَلُوهُنَّ مِنْ وَرَاءِ hijab, from behind a seal, from behind a curtain. And this is purer. ذَلِكُمْ أَطْهَرُ لِقُلُوبِكُمْ وَقُلُوبِهِمْ. This is more purer to your hearts and their hearts. And he says that some of the women, they make something with the khimar when it comes down, they put a cap or something that would prevent the khimar to touch their faces. There's no evidence to this. It's okay if it touches the face, if the khimar comes from the top of the head and it doesn't have any implications to her. She can do that normally, and even if it covers the face. He says also that it's permissible for the men and women in ihram to wash their clothing that they have ihram in if it gets dirty, and they can replace it by something else. All of that, there's no harm in it whatsoever. It is not permissible to wear something that has perfume on, of the clothing of al-ihram, or having saffron or anything of that nature, because of the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. It's also mandatory for the person in ihram to stay away from al-rafath wal-fusuq wal-jidal, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala stated that clearly in the ayah in Surah Al-Baqarah, verse number 197. الحج أشهر معلومات فمن فرض فيهن الحج فلا رفث ولا فسوق ولا جدال في الحج. Sexual relations, vulgar talk that is related to this, whether it's especially also with the intimate speech between a husband and his wife, all of that is forbidden for a person while they're in the state of al-ihram. And no arguments, not to argue while a person is in state of al-ihram, and sins in general. And arguing if it's of no benefit whatsoever, or it's in falsehood. And the Sheikh, as he says, if there's a benefit in enjoining good, forbidding evil, calling people to stay away from a sin or so, then this is definitely something that is recommended for a person to do. It's forbidden for a person in ihram, meaning a male, for a man to cover his head with something that is attached to his head, whether it's a cap or a hat or a ghutra or a imama or the like of this. You know, and this is where the Prophet ﷺ, when the man died in the state of al-ihram, and he said to the people to wash him and to make the kafan of him in the two pieces of garments that he was wearing in ihram, and not to cover his head and his face. because فإنه يبعث يوم القيامة ملبيا, he will be resurrected in the day of judgment making talbiyah. So that means a person is not to cover his head, as we heard, but to have an umbrella, for example, or to be under any shade. There's no harm, whether it's the car or a tree or a tent. Of course, there's no harm in this whatsoever. And this is where the Prophet ﷺ, when he was in Hajj, there was a tent for the Prophet ﷺ. He would go under it to save himself from the heat of the sun. Also, it's forbidden for both men and women to kill the game or to catch an animal in the desert. And so this is also something that is very well observed in Hajj. It's not permissible to have marriage contract, to have relations, intimate relations, to even to be engaged, to have engagements, or to even touch men and women with desires. All of that is not permissible whatsoever. He says that if someone wears a sewed clothing or do any of these forbidden acts of al-ihram, covered his head and all of that forgetfully or not knowing the rulings, there's no fidya, there's no ransom for the person, because he did that out of ignorance or out of forgetfulness. There's no harm in it whatsoever. And the last thing that he mentioned, that it's not permissible for the Muslim, not permissible for a Muslim, whether he is muhrim in state of ihram or not in state of al-ihram, whether he is male or female, to kill the sayd or the game or the animals in the haram, or to help anyone to do so, because this is not permissible in the haram, right? So what's mentioned about the person in ihram outside of the haram, if he's in ihram, is not permissible to catch animals and to catch the game and so on. But within the haram, this is at all times, whether a person is in ihram or not, which basically some of the rulings that related to Mecca specifically, even to make them run or to cut its trees and so on. This is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made for the city of Mecca, the sacred town of Mecca. As you see, the Muslim should exalt the place of worship, the city of Mecca. And that's why even one of the objectives of being in the state of al-ihram before you enter Mecca, because of the status of Mecca. Not anybody just enter like this. You be in state of al-ihram to observe this respect to the house of worship that it was first built, which is the Kaaba, and to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone. We'll stop here inshallah ta'ala. We'll continue next time of what a person making Hajj would do when he enters Mecca. So till next time, I'll leave you with the protection of Allah. Wa sallallahu wa sallam wa baraka ala Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.